Miriam knew that lifting her eyes during the long sermon was a sign of vanity. The bishop's voice droned on like a bee in a jar, heavy and constant. But she couldn't help it. Across the aisle, on the men's side, Elam Zook wasn't looking at the preacher. He was looking at her. And in his hand, hidden partially by the brim of his black felt hat, he held a single blue ribbon, the one she had lost by the creek 3 days ago. Her breath hitched. If her dead saw that ribbon in Elam's hand, the silence of the farm would be shattered forever. The mist clings to the valleys of Pennsylvania like a heavy wool blanket in the early hours of October. In Big Valley the world wakes up before the sun does. There is a specific rhythm to the darkness here. It is the sound of a rooster crowing 3 farms over, the strike of a match against the rough side of a box, and the hiss of gas as the lantern mantles glow to life, casting long, dancing shadows against the whitewashed walls. For Miriam Hostetler, the morning began not with a sound, but with the smell of sourdough starter and wood smoke. At 19 years old, Miriam knew her place in the great turning wheel of the seasons. She was the eldest daughter, the strong right hand of her Meng-Mei. Her hands, though young, were already roughened by the garden hoe and the quilting needle. She moved silently through the kitchen, her bare feet cold on the linoleum floor. The house was asleep, save for the rhythmic breathing of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. This was her time. The quiet time, before the milking, before the cooking, before the needs of 7 younger siblings consumed the day. She went to the window and pulled back the heavy green shade just an inch. Outside, the harvest moon was setting, painting the corn stalks in shades of silver and charcoal. And there, moving along the lane that separated the Hostetler farm from the Zook property, was a silhouette. It was a buggy, but not just any buggy. It was an open courting buggy, moving slowly, almost hesitantly. Miriam's heart did a traitorous little flutter in her chest. She knew that shape. She knew the way the horse tossed its head. It was Elam Zook. Elam was a Nebraskan Amish, the strictest group in the valley, known for their white-topped buggies and their refusal to use even the bright colors Miriam's family allowed. Their family was Byler Amish, distinguished by their yellow-topped buggies and slightly different customs. In the eyes of the world, they were all just plain. But here, in Tevelay, the difference between a white top and a yellow top was a chasm as wide as the ocean. A marriage between the groups was rare. A courtship was almost unheard of. It invited whispers. It invited the frown of the bishop. Yet Elam was there. He stopped the horse by the old oak tree that marked the property line. He didn't get out. He simply sat there, his face turned toward her kitchen window, as if he knew she was watching. Miriam let the curtain fall back into place, her breath trembling. Why was he awake so early? And why did seeing him make the quiet peace of the morning feel suddenly charged with electricity? The day proceeded as all days did, a litany of chores that left no room for idle thoughts. There was the milking, the warm scent of the cows filling the barn, the rhythmic swish-swish of milk hitting the pail. Then breakfast, a hearty meal of fried cornmeal mush and sausage, eaten in silence while Dad read from the German Bible. Be the not unequally yoked. Dad read, his voice gravelly and deep. Miriam kept her eyes on her plate, spreading apple butter on her bread with deliberate care. It felt as though the scripture was aimed right at her heart, an arrow loosed from the pulpit DDA. Had he seen the buggy on the lane? Sunday was approaching. It was an off Sunday for church, which meant the young people would gather for the singing in the evening. It was the only time social barriers lowered, just a fraction. Miriam spent the afternoon ironing her best violet dress, the steam rising around her face, hiding the flush on her cheeks. She braided her hair tightly, pinning it beneath her covering, wrapping herself in the armor of her faith. But beneath the layers of cotton and discipline, her heart was beating a different rhythm. It was beating for the boy with the white-topped buggy. The singing was held in the miller's barn, a cavernous space smelling of sweet hay and polished leather. Kerosene lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a golden, hazy glow over the rows of young men and women sitting on opposite sides. On hay bales, the air was thick with the harmonies of the Ausband, the ancient songs of the martyrs. Taishang, slow, mournful tunes that had been carried across oceans, songs of suffering and endurance. Miriam sat between her cousins, her voice blending into the collective sound. But her eyes were not on the hymn book. Across the threshing floor, the boys sat in their dark vests and broadfall trousers. Elam Zook was there, sitting near the back. He looked different than the others. His hair was cut a little longer, brushing his collar, and there was a restlessness in his posture. He wasn't singing. When the singing ended and the social hour began, the group fractured. Girls huddled in giggling clusters. Boys stood by the barn doors, thumbs hooked in their suspenders, talking about crop prices and horses. Miriam excused herself, stepping out into the cool night air to fetch a cup of cider from the table set up near the corn crib. "The moon is bright tonight." "Miriam," the voice was low, near her ear. She didn't jump. It was as if she had been waiting for it. She turned. Elam stood just outside the circle of lantern light, half in shadow. He looked taller up close, his shoulders broad from pitching hay. "It is, Elam," she whispered, looking around to ensure no one was watching. "You shouldn't be speaking to me here. Your dad is one of the ministers. If he sees you with a Beeler girl, ... My dad sees what he wants to see," Elam said, a bitter edge to his voice. He stepped closer, stepping into a patch of moonlight. His eyes were dark, intense. "He sees a sinner every time he looks at me anyway." "Don't say that," Miriam scolded gently. "You are baptized, same as me. You have made your vow to gut. I made a vow to the church." "Elam, there is a difference, Miriam. Sometimes I think God is bigger than the valley, bigger than the color of a buggy top." This was dangerous talk. This was the kind of talk that led to the shunning, to the empty chair at the dinner table. Miriam clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Why did you stop by the lane this morning?" Elam reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small, smooth stone. It was a river stone, perfectly round, warm from his hand. "I found this by the creek. It reminded me of you." "A stone?" Miriam asked, confused. "It's strong," Elam said softly. "It endures the rushing water, but it stays smooth. It doesn't break." He held it out to her. Their fingers brushed a jolt of warmth in the cool night as she took the stone. "I'm thinking of leaving, Miriam." The world seemed to stop spinning. The laughter from the barn faded into a dull roar. "Leaving for ... for a visit." "For good," Elam said, his voice barely a breath. "To Ohio. Or maybe Indiana. Somewhere where the rules don't choke the life out of a man. I want to buy a tractor. Miriam, Primetawa and Tito farm, but I want to do it my way. You would leave your family? Your faith." Tears pricked Miriam's eyes. "I haven't decided yet." Elam looked down at her, his gaze softening. "Because there is one thing here I don't want to leave." He didn't have to say her name. The weight of his silence said it for him. Miriam squeezed the stone in her hand, the rough edge biting into her palm. She should walk away. She should run back to the safety of the barn, to the hymns and the known world. But she didn't move. Weeks pass. The leaves turned from green to burning red and orange, then fell, leaving the trees like skeletal fingers scratching the gray sky. The secret between Miriam and Elam grew, fed by stolen glances at the market and notes hidden in the hollow of the old oak tree at the property line. It was a Tuesday in November when the storm broke. Miriam was in the cellar, sorting potatoes for the winter bin. The earthy smell of the root cellar usually calmed her, but today her hands were shaking. In her apron pocket was a letter Elam had left that morning. "I am leaving on Friday night. Meet me at the covered bridge at midnight. We can go together. We can be free." The words burned against her thigh. Leaving. It meant excommunication. It meant never sitting at the table with her mangma, and dead again. It meant her sisters would not be allowed to speak to her. But staying meant watching Elam drive away, marrying a man she did not love, and wondering for the rest of her life, what if... "Miriam," her father's voice boomed from the top of the stairs. It wasn't his usual call. It was sharp, laced with an anger she had rarely heard. Miriam froze, a potato tumbling from her hands to the dirt floor. She ascended the stairs slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. In the kitchen, her dead stood by the table. On the wood surface lay a piece of paper, not the letter in her pocket. It was a drawing. Miriam had sketched it days ago, a drawing of a white-topped buggy and a yellow-topped buggy side by side, traveling down a road that had no end. "Where did this come from?" Dad asked, his face red above his beard. Mongim sat in the corner, wiping her eyes with her apron. I drew it." "Dead," Miriam whispered. "And who is the white-topped buggy?" he demanded. "Is it the Zook boy? Elam?" Miriam could not lie. The truth was the foundation of their life. Yes. The silence that followed was louder than thunder. Dad walked to the window, looking out at the barren fields. "I spoke with Bishop Stoltzfus today. He told me Elam Zook has been seen wearing an English wrist. He has been seen talking to tourists in town. He is a wild vine, Miriam, and if you tangle yourself with a wild vine, you will be choked. He has a good heart, Dad," Miriam pleaded, her voice trembling. He struggles with the rules. The rules are the fence." Dad turned, slamming his hand on the table. "They keep the wolves out. You are baptized, Miriam. You made a covenant. If you pursue this connection, you are turning your back on God." "I'm not turning my back on God," Miriam cried, tears spilling over. "I just don't want to turn my back on him." "Then you must choose," her father said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. "If you go with him, if you marry outside our specific district, you cannot be part of this fellowship. You know, Tior, do not break your mother's heart, Miriam. Do not break mine." Thursday night arrived with a biting wind. The farmhouse was silent. Everyone was asleep. Miriam lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her suitcase was not packed. Her plain dress hung on the peg on the wall, but the letter was still in her pocket. Midnight, Friday. The covered bridge. She closed her eyes and prayed. She prayed for a sign. She prayed for the feeling of peace that was supposed to come with doing the right thing. But there was no peace. There was only an ache, a physical pain in the center of her chest. She imagined Elam waiting for her. She imagined him standing by his buggy, the horse's breath steaming in the cold air. She imagined his hand holding hers, leading her into a world of electricity, cars, and noise. A world where they could be together, but a world where she would be an orphan of the spirit. She thought of her Mong, teaching her to quilt, their hands moving in unison over the fabric. She thought of her little sister, Sarah, who needed her help with her reading. She thought of the hymns, the solidity of the earth under her bare feet, the deep, abiding quiet of the valley. Could she survive in the noise? Could she be Miriam Hostetler without the valley? She got up and lit a small candle. She sat at her small writing desk and pulled out a piece of paper. She wrote for an hour, her tears smudging the ink. She poured her love into the words, but she also poured her goodbye. The next morning, she did not go to the covered bridge. Instead, she walked to the hollow oak tree. She placed the letter inside. Beside it, she placed the smooth river stone he had given her. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. Leaving the stone meant she was returning his promise. That night, Friday night, Miriam sat by her window. The clock chimed midnight. In the distance, miles away, she heard the faint clip-clop of a horse moving fast on the paved road. It was a lonely sound, a sound of departure. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and let the tears come. Silent and hot, he was gone. 3 years later, the valley was green again, bursting with the life of May. The apple orchards were frothy with white blossoms, smelling of honey and rain. Miriam stood on the porch, rocking a small wooden cradle with her foot. She was older now. The girl who had drawn buggies in secret was gone, replaced by a woman with steady eyes and calloused hands. She had not married. There had been suitors, good men, kind men, but she had politely declined them all. Her dead, worried, But he did not press her. He seemed to understand that she had given a piece of her heart away that could not be replaced. A buggy turned down the lane. It was not a white top. It was a standard, opened buggy. A man stepped out. He wore the broad-brimmed hat and the suspenders of the plain people, but there was a confidence in his walk that was new. Miriam froze. Her hand went to her throat. It was Elam. He walked up the path, removing his hat. He looked older, too. There were lines around his eyes, and his hands were rougher. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "Miriam," he said. His voice was deeper, grounded. "Elam," she whispered, terrified this was a dream. "I thought, ... you went to Ohio. I thought you left." "I did," Elam said. He looked out over the fields, then back at her. "I went to Ohio. I bought a tractor. I lived with the English for 2 years. And I learned something," Elam said, stepping up 1 step. "I learned that the world is loud. Miriam, it is full of noise and hurry. I made money. I saw movies. I drove a car." He paused, twisting his hat in his hands. "But every night, when I closed my eyes, I didn't see the city lights. I saw the moon over Big Valley. I saw the river stone I gave you. I realized that freedom isn't doing whatever you want. Freedom is knowing where you belong." "You came back?" Miriam asked, tears springing to her eyes. "I came back." Elam nodded. "I sold the tractor. I made my confession to the bishop last Sunday. I am starting over. From the bottom, I am working as a hired hand for the Millers." He reached into his pocket. He pulled out the smooth river stone. He had taken it from the tree that night, 3 years ago. "I kept this," he said. "It reminded me that some things endure. Some things don't break, even when they are tested." Miriam walked down the steps. She didn't care who was watching. She didn't care about the years of silence. She reached out and placed her hand over his, covering the stone. "Welcome home, Elam," she said, a smile breaking through her tears, like the sun through the morning mist. They stood there in the quiet of the afternoon, 2 people who had weathered the storm. They knew the road ahead would be long. There was trust to rebuild, a community to convince. But as the wind rustled the apple blossoms, showering them in white petals, Miriam knew that the seasons had turned. And finally, it was spring.